So let me just say this one thing. So I've been trying to upload my video from last night up to onto YouTube, but it's been stuck on processing for like 24 hours. So I'm just gonna stop that. I think there might be something wrong with the video. So I was thinking if you guys want, if you're okay with it, either I won't post one for then, or I could post one that I did with another class. Would you want the one I did with another class? One I did with another class. Okay, I'll just send you a link. Whatever. So, okay, without further ado, let me share my screen. Can everybody see my screen? Dope. All right. So, judging from what everyone voted on, we're going to be doing some review, and the first thing we're going to do is my slice, right? Whoops. Cool. So my slice is going to mimic the slice function. Now, I never went over this in class, but slice can take negative numbers, okay? So this could be useful for many reasons. So if we want to include everything except the last element, we would do 0 to negative 1, because negative 1 will always represent the last element. So negative 1 is always going to be array.length, array.length minus 1. Negative 2 is always going to be array.length minus 2, and so on and so forth, right? So keep that in the back of your head, because we have to do something about this in the beginning of our function before we start looping. However, first we have to take into account, like when we did with the string method, when we did my slice for strings, we have to take into account if, well, first let's do array. If the start index and the stop index is not passed in, right? So I can write these if statements over here, like if this is undefined, but I can just do this, right? We will start this at 0, and we will stop this at where? We will stop this at array.length minus 1, right? No, not minus 1, just the length. Because this is not inclusive, right? So we want everything before where we stop. So before where we stop, and if the stop is the length, then that will be the last element. Does everyone agree? So if I set this up like this, then I can start handling these numbers. So yeah, this can take negative numbers, right? But I know that we're going to have to be doing some kind of loop, and we're going to have to make like a let new array equal an empty array, and we have to push everything into here, right? Because slice returns a copy. Slice returns a new array. So what if we just said if start is less than 0? So if it's negative, if start is less than 0, we can just reassign it using some math, right? So up here I say negative 1 is array.length minus 1, right? So if that's true, can I just do array.length plus start? So if this is negative, it would be plus negative 1, which is the same thing as minus 1, and the same thing as minus 2 if it was negative 2. And we can do the same thing in an if statement for stop. If stop is less than 0, then stop is now going to be equal to array.length plus stop. How does this feel for everybody? And because this is on one line, I can do this. Cool? So this will take care of negative things. Because if we pass in -1 as a start, what we really mean is to start at the last element, right? So the last element is this. So array.length plus -1 will give us that, okay? Now, this problem actually becomes a lot more simple. We could do for let I is going to be equal to start, I is less than stop, and then I plus plus. So now we could just do new array dot push array at I. And then we could just turn new array. And here is our extremely concise and nice looking mySlice function. Who has some questions on this? Someone's got to have something on this. When I'm sharing my screen, can you guys see my face? Oh, you can see my face? That's weird. All right. Because I've been always talking with my hands, but like I don't really know if you can see me. All right, cool. So now we're going to be going into... You guys are sure you don't have any questions on mySlice, right? All right, cool. Now we're going to be going into, what was that? Rotate array. And this is just going to take an array, and it's just going to take a num. And we're supposed to rotate it a certain amount of times, right? So, I understand the solution, right? The solution is a little weird to read, right? Like, the solution for this was something that nobody should have thought of on their own, in my opinion. Like, dot slice, negative num, and then the end is 0 to negative num, right? But that, using the methods in that way and negative numbers, I feel like is just like a weird way to think, right? So I'm going to show you a solution to do this with just regular loops and a little bit of reassignment, okay? So what we can do is we can first off say, like, let results, or yeah, we could say let result array equal an empty array, okay? So we know that we want to rotate this, right? So if we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and if we pass in a 1, what we want is 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Because we're moving everything once. So let's think about this. Let's think about this. 1 could represent something like a pivot point almost, right? So we take everything from the back. We have one. Well, let me think of a way to explain this in a way that's like not my head. 'Cause sometimes I think of things in ways that like don't really make sense to everybody else. So the first thing, because this also takes negative numbers, the first thing we can do, since we're doing arrays as well, the same way we treated those negative numbers before, we can do that again now, because that's kind of how it works, right? -1 is really the thing in the back, -2 is really 2 from the back, right? So we could say, like, if num is less than 0, right away, we can just do num is going to be equal to array.length plus num, okay? Right away. So now we're only dealing with positive numbers, because dealing with negative numbers in code is just weird and annoying, right? So now we need our pivot point. So if we have 1, we could say let pivot point equal array.length minus num, right? So we have our length, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we want to do this one rotations, right? So our pivot point will be 5 minus 1. So that's 4. Correct? So let me show you what I'm getting at over here. So if we do one for loop, and we set I equal to the pivot point, right? I is less than array.length. So go to the end of the array, and then we do I plus plus. We can just do result array dot push array of I. So our pivot point will be 4, right? Does that make sense? And what is the last index in this array? Index 4, right? So we start at index 4, we go until the end of the array, so we're only doing this loop once with this example. And what is that, 5? So we push 5 in here. Does that make sense? Now, I need to get the rest. So I can just do another for loop. So I can do for let I equal 0 from the start. I is less than pivot point I plus plus. And then I could say result array dot push array of I. And then I can just return result array. So read this over for a second, right? What am I actually doing, right? So I have this pivot point, which is 1. Let's say it was a negative 1, right? That's supposed to output this, right? That's supposed to output this, right? So if I have a negative 1, but what am I really saying, though? I'm not saying, like, still do it 1 time. Negative 1 would mean that we actually want to do it 4 times, right? Like, if I put in 4 and I put in negative 1, that will be the same result, right? Does that make sense? Like, if your function was correct, these would be the same. So the first thing that I'll do is I'll make it a positive number, because it's how many rotations we're doing. Negative numbers translate to positive numbers. So once I have that positive number, I take a pivot point. And the pivot point is like saying, like, okay, so if this is 4, right, and I want this, it's like, how do I, once you see what you need to get, we need to figure out how we can make this, right? Oh, shit. Whoops. So our pivot point will be array.length minus 4. So it's going to be 1, right? So we start at 1, and we take everything from the end, right? And we put that into our result array. Then we go from the beginning and take everything up to the point. Does this make sense? It's kind of like you're shifting, right? But only once. Does that make sense? This might be more confusing to do. I feel like this is an easier way to think about it. Because in this way, this is pretty much what the solution was doing. All those slices. Every time you use slice, what JavaScript is doing behind the scenes is looping, right? So that's...
I have, sorry, just one question. So for both of those for loops, you used I.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're using the same thing on purpose?
Well, they're not inside of each other. This is a standalone for loop, and this is a standalone for loop, right? So these for loops have no relation to each other, right? So that means what I'm doing inside of this for loop has nothing to do with what I'm doing inside this for loop. So I can call I the same thing. If this was in here, and I was doing another for loop in here, then I would have to change this to j, so I can access both numbers. However, they're not related, so I use I all the time, right? Because it doesn't really matter. So we know, because I know what I is all the time. I is always going to be used to find one point in your array. Does that make sense? Okay. If you want to change it down as you go for it, but like you might be doing a lot of loops in some functions, so you might start thinking like you're running out of letters, and then it's gonna look weird when you start looping with like K, you know? It's like, who wants to do that? Or H or something. Some weird letters, like M. Alright, anyways. So that's rotate array. Any questions on that? Nothing? Alright, cool. So now I need everybody to do me a solid. I need everybody to take everything they learned about arrays and just stop thinking about that. I need everyone to just stop thinking about arrays right now, okay? Because we're going to be doing something that's completely different. We're going to be learning about objects today, okay? And objects, you can think of them sort of like arrays, but I would really rather you think of them as a completely fresh start. Don't compare them, okay? So give me 1 second. I just want to make sure that I'm going to get everything I have to talk about. Cool. All right. So let's get into it. What is an object? This is an object. Objects are curly braces, okay? Curly braces, this is an empty object. But what exactly is an object? An object is an unordered collection of key value pairs. If you're familiar with Ruby, it's a hash. If you're familiar with Python, it's a dictionary. Every single language has something like this, okay? More or less. So, what do I mean by key value pairs? I mean that there's going to be something that's called a key and its value. Like that. This is an object with one key value pair inside of it. Okay? So, why would I do something like this? It's because objects, like think of it as arrays, right? Like arrays, you have all these things inside of these numeric indices, right? However, where they're stored are just numbers, right? So when you look them up by number, that doesn't really say what that thing is, right? So these keys offer a description to what their values could be. So like, let's say I have like a person object, right? And it's going to have all these different key value pairs. So it's going to have a name, which will be me. It will have, and you separate these with commas, okay? Just like indexes. So multiple key value pairs you separate with commas. So we'll have a name, we'll have an age property, so that'll be 25. We'll have a hobbies property, and this will be coding, and nothing, because I'm boring. Okay? So it's an array. So objects, like arrays, their values can store anything, okay? So if I said, like, criminal record, right, I can have null. So objects like arrays can store every kind of data, okay? And these are all their own key value pairs, okay? Any questions so far? Okay. One thing I need all of you to realize is that, or something that you might have found like annoying when I was just typing all of this stuff, is why am I doing this? Like, what is this? Every single time you've ever wrote a word in JavaScript down here, without like quotes or something, it's supposed to be a variable, right? But these things aren't variables, but they're keys. But what does that really mean? All keys in JS are strings. However, when you define an object like this, you can omit the strings. So you can do this or you can do this. But like, why would you ever do this if you could do this? However, since they're strings, they can also have special characters as their key. If you want to put something as their special character, you have to do this. Okay? Like if criminal record was instead criminal record with a space. Spaces are special characters, right? Because like you can't name a variable with a space in it. That doesn't make sense, right? Because you're writing two different things. However, since all keys are strings, the space is a valid character, so you just need to incorporate that when you're defining it, okay? Oh, whoops. Any questions on that? Cool. So, how do I access these values, right? How do I...
Quick question.
Yeah, what's up?
So when would you put a quote and not a quote?
Like, the quote I would put in because there's a space, right? Like, if I got rid of these quotes, and I try to console.log person, oh, whoops. There would be, like, a syntax error. It wouldn't run, right? Because of the space, right? Like, if you try to do, like, const hello world is equal to hi, like, this won't run either, right? Because we'll say, like, hello world, or whatever. The page won't even run, right? Like, it'll just stop here because it's a syntax error. It's just wrong, right? But if I didn't do this, then you could see, like, this is wrong, right? This is just a syntax error.
That makes sense.
So, if you wanted, but like I said, all keys are actually strings, right? So if you did want to include a space inside of your key, just wrap it with this, and JavaScript will read this as a string instead of like a space, right? So if I console.log, oh, whoops, person here, we have the person. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Cool. So how do I access markup? Right? Like I would do like person at 0, right? No. Person at 0 is undefined. What if I did person at name? There we go. This is how you access certain certain values in an object with bracket notation. So bracket notation comes back to us from accessing characters in strings and accessing elements in arrays, right? This is also how you access values in objects, but instead of passing a numeric indice, you have to pass that value's key, right? So the key is name, and its value is markup. So person at name is markup, right? There is another way to do this. This is bracket notation. This is dot notation. Person dot age. This looks familiar, right? Like dot to uppercase, dot push, dot split. I mean dot split, dot slice, right? These are all, this is called dot notation, right? What dot notation does is it takes everything to the right of it and it says, okay, where is that key in here? Right? And then it returns that value here. If you wanted to use bracket notation and give the actual name of the key, since all keys are strings, this has to be in quotes. So let me ask you a question. what happens now? What do you think is going to happen? Do you think I'll get null? I will get null. Do you think I'll get null now? No. I do not get null now. Now I get undefined. And this is the main difference between bracket and dot notation. And I need everybody to pay attention here, okay? Because I feel like this is always confusing in the beginning. Bracket notation will evaluate the variable inside of it. What is what happens storing? What value is what happens storing? Criminal record. So what JavaScript does is say, okay, what is what happens? It is criminal record. So let's look for a key in person that's criminal record. Dot notation, now, dot notation, on the other hand, looks up for a key inside of here that literally is called what happens. So it is looking for what happens. And if this was this happens, we get this happens. Does this make sense? The dot literally looks for a key that is to the right. The bracket evaluates the variable. The dot does not look for a variable. It just looks through the object. Bracket first looks for a variable, then looks for the object. Does this make sense? Hell yeah. Okay. So let's continue. How do I add something? You know, I'll just type this in here. How do I add something into here? Well, I won't console that. If I want to add something into person, like person at least favorite fruit is now going to be equal to bananas. Okay? So when I console.log person, person down here, right? Get rid of this. As you can see, least favorite fruit is now inside of the object. Okay? And it's as simple as that. So you just say person at whatever, or you can do like person dot least favorite fruit, and it'll have the same effect, except when you use dot notation, you can't use special characters. When you use bracket notation, you can use special characters, because then you're going by strings, right? Dot notation, you're going by variable naming conventions. Like, you can't do, like, spaces, okay? So, basically, you do person dot new key is now going to be equal to this. Any questions? Cool. So now, how do I reassign something? What if I told you that what if I told you that instead of like Marco, I wanted to put my full name, right? How do I reassign this? How do I change a value? It's the same thing. Is now going to be equal to Marco Lisenek. This is the same syntax as adding, okay? Because what we're actually doing in these two lines, we're saying person.name If there's nothing there, this is going to go in there. Even if there is something there, this is going to go in there. Because all keys in an object are unique. Okay? They have to be unique. There can only be one unique key in an object. So when you do person.name, if there was something there, it is now going to be overwritten. If I didn't want to do that, I could do person.name plus equals space Listenek. And this will have the same effect, because that is still a string, right? And you could still concatenate things into it. Just like you could say, like, person.hobbies.push, what are one of my hobbies? Vinyl. I collect vinyl. So if I console.log person down here, we have vinyl in here, right? These are still just regular values, and they're always going to be stored at this key, in the side of this object. So I can mess with them as much as I want, right? I can do age, person.age plus plus, right? And now I'm 26. Not yet, though. You know what I mean? So I'll go back down. Person.age minus minus. Okay? Any questions on adding or replacing or altering data inside of objects?
Just for clarification, it permanently mutates the object when you redefine the terms forever. Okay, cool.
Yeah, I am changing the just like in an array. If I did array at 0 is equal to false, it was a string, but now it's just equal to false. That array has changed. Same logic here. Okay. Any other questions? So as you can see, objects are complex data types. We are mutating objects right here. Does this make sense? So there is another thing that you can do, is let's say I just, since my criminal record is null and I'm such a good person that I'm never going to get one, how do we delete key value pairs from a person? We could do delete person dot, I have to do brackets because I have the space. Bracket criminal record, right? And then I could console.log that person. And you see the criminal record has been deleted. The key value pair has been deleted, okay? What the hell was that? Any questions on delete? Cool. This is pretty straightforward, right? Just delete space and then that. Whatever key you pass in, that key value pair will be deleted from the object. All right, so let's get rid of that console log. Let's leave all that other stuff because we'll still be messing with the person. So how do I, let's say I wanted to loop through this object, right? And these, you can do this, right? You can do this. However, think back. Like in arrays, when we use for loops, we set something equal to I, and then we increment that value, right? So like 0, and then you add. And since arrays are 0 to whatever, you can use that I to access everything there. You know? Like the for loop and the array aren't related in any way. We're just using this tool of a loop to access everything in an array. However, for in loops are a little different. So there is something called a for in loop, right? And it kind of looks the same at first, but we say let my variable in person, okay? So what I'm doing here is I'm saying let something I define. I'm going to change this to key because that's what it really is. And you can do this whatever you want. You can name that whatever you want. So let key in person, right? So let's say I'm going to console.log the key has the value. And let's see what we get in our console. Oh, key. Oh, whoa, what the hell am I doing? Person at key. So, let's look at what's going on in here, right? So we have the key. What is the key? The key name. Well, let's get rid of the space because it's weird. The key name has the value Marco Lisanek, right? So the key each time in each iteration is going to be a different key in that object. And we will go and go and go until it is done, until we've hit every single key value pair in that object, okay? So the key age has the value 25. The key hobbies has the value of this array. The key least favorite fruit has the value bananas. And this is the basic structure of a for and loop. So let's say I wanted to write a function that will detect an array and then go through all of the elements in there, right? So the first thing I want to do is I want to say const loop through inner array is going to be equal to this function, and it's going to take an object, right? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do for let key in obj, right? Look at this setup. Let key, this variable I'm defining here that this variable I'm declaring here is going to be what is going to store the key in every iteration. Then we have the in keyword, okay? The in keyword, and then the object will be looping through, okay? This is just going to be the parameter, all right? So for let key in object, I do if obj at key, right? Because up here we did person at name, person.age, right? We do if obj.key, at key, what, right? If array.isArray. If it's an array, we could do for let I equals 0, I is less than obj at key dot length, I plus plus, and then we can do console.log obj at key at I. So let's see what happens when we do loop through inner array and we pass in person. We get coding nothing vinyl. We loop through the object. This is like a REPL error. This underline. Let me refresh. I hate it when that happens. I don't. It shouldn't bother me because it's just a red underline. But like you have to refresh REPL sometimes because sometimes it sucks. 1 second. So we loop through the object. We capture the key every time. We check to see if object at that key. So this is how you get the value, right? We check to see if that value is an array. If it is, let's loop through that thing until I is less than the length is no longer true. And then we could console.log that array at I. And then we'll get our answer. Now, can I do this? Can I do this? I can't do that. I just can't do that. Now, it's not very clear as to why I can't do that here. So I'm going to comment this out. I'm going to comment this out. I'm going to comment this back in. And I'm going to do person.key here. What do you think I'm going to get every single time? I'm going to get undefined. Because what am I doing? What am I doing with dot notation? Every single time, key, think about it. Key is a variable, right? And the variable is going to hold a string value because all keys in JavaScript are strings. And every iteration, this key will have a new key, a new string, right? But does dot notation read variables? No. Dot notation looks inside of person for a key that is called key every single time. So if I added key inside of here and I said, this is wrong, dummy, what I get is this is wrong, dummy, every single time. Does that make sense? And if I switch this back to a bracket, it will evaluate what key is storing. So we get Marco, 25, the array. This is wrong, dummy, and then bananas. As you can see, though, didn't I put key after criminal record? Oh, no, never mind. I added all this stuff over here. So if you do this like 100 times, it'll probably be in the same order. But sometimes it's not in the same order, okay? So you can't always count on order for objects, okay? And that's why we store them in key value pairs. Any questions?
Oh, I have a question. So for this for in loop, so there's
This one?
yeah. So we don't. So are there ever situations where you wouldn't want to like go through every single key in the object? Because like I guess like I'm just curious. Like in the for loop, there was like a condition that you can like get it to stop midway. But I was just curious like if that's ever. Oh, so you put it there. Okay. Oof.
Right?
Yeah.
So if you find what you're looking for, just break.
Mm-hmm.
Make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. So, like, here we would use the return keyword in here to stop the whole function, or we would use the break keyword if you ever want to prematurely stop your object, your for in loop, right? Any other questions? So there is one method I want to show you before we stop. Before we go into slides, and that is something that's called object.keys. Just like a capitalized everything, we have global string object, global number object, global boolean object, global array object. We have a global object, and that has a keys property off it. And that property is a method, which means it's a function. So we can pass it, let's say, an object. What are we going to get? Oh, whoops, keys, my bad. We get an array of all of the keys. Now, you guys are probably all thinking, wow, that's so cool that I can get the keys in an array. Wow, that's sick. But like, honestly, you might not need this, okay? So really think if having an array with all of the keys is what you need to do, okay? Some people just always put this at the top of their functions. They're like, nice, first let me get all the keys in an array. But it's like, is that really what you want? You know what I mean? However, this is sometimes really useful. Sometimes this is great, okay? But this exists. Also, just for, you can do this. Object.values, you pass in the object and it returns an array of all the values, okay? Again, this might never be useful, maybe you'll use it every time, you know? Everything has its place. Cool. So I guess now I'm going to go into some slides. How does everybody feel about objects? Not bad? A little different? Pretty different. That's why I said come into this with like an open mind, right? Pretty different. However, I think they're still pretty manageable. So here we'll talk about what an object is, why they're useful, type of, oh, I didn't show you that, but who wants to guess that it's object, right? Who wants to guess? You know what I mean? So we'll talk about accessing, adding, changing, deleting, in operator, for and loop, dot keys, and nested arrays and objects. So I kind of showed you that already. So what is an object? An object is an unordered collection of key value pairs. Like arrays, objects store values, but instead of storing them in numeric indices, objects store values in string keys. So let my array is value 1, value 2. Let my object, we have key 1 is value 1, key 2 is value 2. My array at 0, my object at key 1, we have value 1, value 1. Any questions? Any questions? All right, cool. Why are objects useful? Consider representing Pusheen the cat as an array. Let Pusheen equal Pusheen 7 gray tabby. An array is a good place to hold an ordered list of values, but it doesn't really store any information about those values represent. An object string, keys, allows objects to store more information about the values within it. So I can have name Pusheen, age 7, color gray and tabby, right? This makes more sense for humans. When you get into the real world, all of your data that you'll be dealing with, and yeah, you're going to be dealing with lots of data, will either be represented as an array or an object. And that object will have a lot of arrays in it, or that array will have a lot of objects in it, okay? It's either one or the other. This is important stuff, okay? Type of object is object. Moving on. So creating an object, we have curly braces, right? So an object's keys are always strings, but you can actually omit the quotation marks, right? So this is still valid syntax. You can put them in, but that is an extra key press, right? And it's all about saving key presses, right? It's all about, like, diminishing the time till we all get carpal tunnel and have to find new careers, right? I think about that all the time. All the time. Anyways, so accessing a value in an object. So we can use bracket notation, and we can pass a string into the brackets that corresponds with a key in the object. So we say let Pusheen equal name Pusheen, age 7, the same object we've been dealing with. Console.log Pusheen bracket string name. Console.log Pusheen bracket age. Color. Not a key in the object. So Pusheen 7 gray and tabby undefined. Just like strings and arrays, if you're trying to access something that isn't there, that doesn't exist, you'll get undefined. Okay? Any questions? Cool. Any variable or expression that evaluates through a string can be passed into the brackets. So if I say let key to check equal name, Pusheen key to check, Pusheen COL plus OR, we get Pusheen and gray and tabby. Because this evaluates to name. COL plus OR evaluates to color, and color is in here, and name is in here too. This makes sense, right? Like, you can always do array at I plus 1, right? You can do that, array bracket I plus 1, so why can't I do this? You can also use dot notation to access values. Let key to check equal name, Pusheen.name, and you don't need any quotes, right? Color, key to check. Pusheen 7 gray and tabby, undefined. Why is that undefined? Using bracket notation or dot notation. Oh wait, that does. Hold on, let me see. I thought the next slide would go into like why that's undefined. So it's undefined because we're looking for a key in here that's called key to check. Because dot notation does not evaluate the variable. It does not look for variables. It just looks inside of the object. Okay? Does this make sense? So adding a key value pair, you can use bracket or dot. So Pusheen bracket string sister equals Stormy. Pusheen dot brother equals Pip. Pusheen name, age, color, sister, brother. You can see that they're both there. Easy, right? Just this dot this is now going to be equal to this. Changing a value is the same thing. So we can do Pusheen at age is now going to be equal to 8. It's the same syntax as adding, except now we're saying whatever was there, we will reassign it to 8. So if we can reassign it, then we can do plus plus, right? Because that's like plus equals whatever, right? Plus equals 1. So as you can see, age has been changed to 9. Does that make sense?
Do you have to put the quotation for Pusheen age?
You had to do that, otherwise you would have to do dot age. Because if you don't put the quotations around age, what JavaScript will think is that age is a variable. If there's something in here without quotes, JavaScript will think this is a variable, and then it will try to evaluate the variable. And if you try to use a variable that was never defined anywhere, then this will be undefined and will throw an error. That make sense?
Yep.
Cool. So deleting a key value pair, I went over this briefly. You just delete, and you console log. You see they're gone, right? Delete Pusheen bracket age, delete Pusheen dot color. As you could see, the entire key value pair has disappeared from Pusheen. I cut it out of her. Okay. Sorry. Shouldn't have used that. That's not funny. Okay. Anyways, so the in operator. We use the in operator in a for in loop. However, we actually use this. We can use this in like an if statement. Okay. So we use this to check if a key is in an object, right? So here's our Pusheen cat, our nice cat that we love. We love cats, right? Console.log name in Pusheen. Sadness in Pusheen. There is no sadness in Pusheen. We get false. Pusheen is just love and happiness, and we love Pusheen, right? Name in Pusheen, that is here. So we get true. This returns true or false if this key is inside of the object. Easy to use, right? And it's very quick. If you wanted to see, hey, does this have this property? Hey, you know, like, you get the true or false, okay? Any questions on the in operator? Cool. So, to the for in loop. We have our object, and we want to look at everything, but we don't know what the keys are, right? So we say for let key in Pusheen. Let key is the same thing as let I, except we're not assigning it anything. We're just doing let key. What the for in loop does is it assigns that key, that variable, it could be whatever you want, that variable, it assigns the string keys through every iteration. So if we have that key, we can use that key to access Pusheen with brackets, right? If key is name, Pusheen bracket key evaluates to name, so we'll get Pusheen, right? Same thing with age and same thing with color. It evaluates to its value. Does that make sense? As you can see, dot notation should rarely be used inside of for in loops. I mean, not rarely. Like, you can do whatever you want anywhere at any point of time. I don't care, right? However, if you want to use that let key you're defining on line 9, you can't use dot notation because it'll just be undefined. Or if there is something that's called key inside your object, it'll just be that over and over again, okay? Because this does not evaluate what key is, okay? all it does is look for a key that is called key inside of Pusheen. And as you see, there's nothing there, so we get undefined. Does this make sense? All of you will make this mistake in the workshop, I guarantee it. Well, I hope not, but usually people do. It's tricky, okay? Does that make sense, though? All right. Then we got object.keys. Like I said, this just returns an array of all the keys. You may want to use this, you may not need to. Don't just use it blindly, okay? However, it's pretty useful. So name, age, color, we get that in an array. Then we can loop through that, look up everything, whatever. You know what I mean? So object.keys exist. I also showed you .values, which does the opposite. It gives you an array of all the values. Objects can store any type of value, including arrays and other objects. So let Pusheen name, age, color. Now colors will be an array, and it will be gray and tabby inside, right? So we console.log Pusheen.colors at 0, Pusheen.colors at 1, and we get gray, and then we get tabby. Does this make sense? It's kind of like nested arrays, right? Bracket 0, bracket 1, bracket 1, bracket 1, bracket 2, bracket 1, right? And you can get the inner things inside of those arrays. This is dot, bracket, because the bracket is 0, 1, because we know that it's an array. Right? Now we have our siblings key inside Pusheen, and its value is one object. Its value is one object, and inside of that one object, we have two key value pairs. Sister Stormy, brother Pip. Console.log Pusheen.siblings.sister.siblings.brother. Yes, you can do this. That is fine. You just chain the dots. Because what is Pusheen.siblings? It's an object. So this evaluates to an object. So it's that object.sister, we got Stormy. That object.brother, and we get Pip. We go deep, deep inside Pusheen to get her siblings. So, a recap. We talked about objects, why they're useful, yada, 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 foreign loop, important, accessing, adding, changing, dot keys, nested, everything. So, how does that feel? How does that feel? So, objects are not like arrays. They're just not, okay? They're vastly different. And I just said that there's all these rules and all these regulations and all this syntax that you have to worry about. So, if you don't get this right away, just relax. This is going to come with time. This is like a lot of... I feel like the hardest classes is when there's a lot of new information. Because when there's a lot of new information, then it gets like a little overwhelming when you try to do simple things. Because you know that they're simple, but it's just you can't remember one aspect about it. So just take a step back, all right? Any questions before we get started with the workshop? Please ask me questions if you are confused.
You said you're logging our attendance, right?
Yeah. Okay. I was literally about to go over this just after there were questions. After there were no questions. So like,
Okay.
basically, if you guys are still getting the emails, I've been asked like, can we stop those emails? No, we can't. But don't worry, if you're here, I am marking you here, okay? I can see who's here in the Zoom, and I go through this right after I'm done with my lecture, okay? I don't want to do the attendance right before the lecture because people jump in sometimes, like 10 minutes later if they weren't like busy, so I don't want to mark them as here. So I do it after the lecture. I go through and see who's here. So if you still get those emails and you're here, there's like 10 of us. I didn't miss you, okay? Don't worry. Everything's set. Any other questions?